Welcome to the podcast, Restore Yourself, Restore Your Marriage, where it's all about discovering the thoughts that get you in the mood, the thoughts that get you out of the mood, and how creating a deeper connection with yourself creates a deeper connection with your spouse. I'm your coach, Shelly Anderson, coaching you through life, love, and intimacy.
This is episode number 112, Accentuating Hope When Depression Comes Knocking. So this is going to be a little bit more of a heavy topic, but one that I think is so necessary and vital in today's world.
I think it kind of goes along with the theme of a lot of what we talk about. And sometimes it's the thing that you don't think you need, but you probably do or will in the future.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times when it comes to depression or hopelessness, I think a lot of times we feel like, oh, I'm okay, I'm good. But we're going to talk about ways to see those signs in other people, in particular your spouse or other loved ones. And you may not think that there are any of those signs now, but we're going to talk about those because it's important, especially in this world. Look, we want to attack the challenges that we're facing in this world, and one of them is stress and hopelessness and confusion. I guess that's not one of them, that's three of them. Yeah. But to go on, I mean, there's despair, there's, just feeling like we're alone, even when we have people around us all the time. We have these days, and we may feel like we can get through them, and we have the tools necessary to get through them. But what about our loved ones? And what about the assumptions that we make that, oh, they're okay. They have me to help them. Well, we're going to find that there are many instances where that's not enough. And we need to be aware of those things so that we can help. Now, we're also going to talk about ways to avoid hopelessness and avoid depression, but also to be able to see when those things pop up. And look, it happens all the time in marriages. It happens all the time with children. And it's on the rise. So, as you know, we're not licensed therapists or psychologists or psychiatrists. We're coaches. So, if you feel like you really need to get help, we encourage you to do so with professionals that address depression or clinical depression. We're here to help you to even avoid that and also give you some tools to spot those things even before you get to a place where it becomes serious. And so that's what we're going to do today.
It's so true. And I think one of the reasons we felt like this topic was so important is because these are on the rise. And I think it can be easy to dismiss maybe something that is kind of standing out to you, like, oh, I've noticed this about them, but it's probably fine. Like, it can just be so easy to just kind of brush it aside and not actually take a closer look at it. And so today we wanted to talk about some of the concrete signs of depression to start off with so that you guys can recognize them and say, you know what, I am noticing this. And I think this is like something that they're really going through. So that way we can kind of stop doing this dismissiveness of like, oh, they're fine. Everything's fine. They'll get through it in a couple days.
Yeah.
So let's just dive in. We're going to go through some of the signs of depression. And I think as we're talking about some of these signs, it will be important to know that depression can be diagnosed in a variety of ways. You can have mild depression. You can have major depression. You can have different types of depression within these categories. And what's going to make a difference is how long these depressive episodes last. That is going to be one of the big determining factors of maybe what type of depression someone is facing, and also how severely it's impacting somebody's life. So if someone is experiencing mild depression, they may have a lot of these symptoms, But it could be that they're still able to get up and go to work, and they're still able to take care of their kids. And it's more like, okay, maybe around 7:30 at night, that's where some of these symptoms are showing up, but they're still functioning for the most part pretty well. And then there are other times where someone can't even get out of bed, so they are missing work. So it's important to kind of just keep those differences in the back of your mind, like how long is this lasting, and what's the severity of it? Is it really impacting someone's ability to function as they normally have been functioning?
And a lot of times we might mistake it for, oh, well, they're just upset with me.
Yeah.
Or they're just miserable in a relationship or whatever. Well, that's not necessarily the case. You might find that there is actually some other challenges happening, and this feeling of worthlessness or hopelessness, or maybe they don't feel like they're meeting your expectations. Well, that might be true, but there may be some underlying issues there. And so this is a huge intimacy builder as well, to find more and more hope. One of the things that strengthens intimacy, I think, the most is to have confidence and hope in your relationship. And if you're having signs of depression, or you're down for some reason, this is something that's going to get in the way of your relationship. There's no question about it. But if you know the signs and you know how to be empathetic and sympathetic to that person who you know the best, and you think you know them so well, but you might find that you don't know every single thing going on with them if you don't know how to approach them.
Yeah, and as humans, we make all kinds of assumptions, right? So we may see our spouse struggling, and we might make all kinds of assumptions about what that really means, when we could be way off and really miss something like this. So let's talk about some of the symptoms. There are 9 major symptoms, and usually for someone to actually get diagnosed with depression, they have to have 5 of them. So let's talk about them. The first one is that they are going to be feeling depressed for more than 10 minutes, right? Like it's maybe a couple hours if you're experiencing mild depression, but if it's major depression, this could be lasting all day. So this would be that you are feeling emotions of sadness, emptiness, like you mentioned, loneliness, that things can't get better. Those are some of the emotions that come with feeling depressed. And so it's good to be able to kind of just know what some of those are, and have that awareness and be on the lookout for those. The second symptom would be a diminished interest and pleasure in most of the activities that they have enjoyed before. They may be going through the motions, but they may be starting to avoid, let's say they really enjoyed playing the piano. And all of a sudden, it's just absent from their life, and something that used to bring them so much joy, they have no interest in participating in it or even enjoying it. They may totally know that, hey, I have always loved playing the piano, and they do not find the happiness and pleasure from that anymore.
That doesn't mean you can't take a break from something, but just something to be aware of.
Yeah, so true. And another example might be someone who likes to knit, right? They are used to knitting. Maybe it helps them wind down at night. They like to knit certain items for family members, for their birthdays or for holidays. And all of a sudden you notice like there's no knitting happening.
Yeah.
So it's just good to kind of have that in the back of your mind, and be aware of. The third symptom that we could look for has to do with weight. And this is going to be either weight gain when they don't want to gain weight, or they're not trying to like increase their body mass or their muscles, or a significant weight loss. And again, they're not trying to lose weight, but they are losing weight.
Loss of appetite is a big one.
Loss of appetite. They're just not interested even in eating.
Yeah, or eating to kill the pain.
Yes.
And
Ben and Jerry's.
It goes both ways.
That's right. So it does go both ways. So having that awareness, if you notice your spouse or someone you love where you're like, oh my gosh, like that's a significant weight gain in such a short amount of time, or weight loss. Okay, it's time to pay attention. The fourth symptom to be aware of would be insomnia. And this is when your brain is busy and it can't shut off, and you can't fall asleep. Even if your body wants to, you're like, I am tired, I'm physically tired. You can't fall asleep. And at the same time, it could be the opposite, where you are sleeping all day. And maybe you could have the energy to get up and do something, but your body's like, no, I am sleeping now. We're going to be sleeping. This is the 7th hour of sleep, and it's still not enough.
And it could be both, right? You could be up all night and then sleeping all day.
Yeah.
And just exhausted because you're up all night worrying about things. I mean, so far, all of these, everything you've mentioned, I've experienced.
Yeah.
And I think there have been times when I've been depressed, and I don't have clinical depression. I don't think I've ever had clinical depression, but I don't think this is abnormal for people. So as you go through these, don't panic.
Yeah.
But when you start adding up the factors and how it affects your life, these are things to just be aware of. And we're going to talk later about a little bit more of a clinical way that regular people can spot depression. There's a really quick training we're going to talk about that you can do. But these are all things that I think all of us experience from one time to another. But if you're experiencing all of these things, it's going to be really hard to function and really hard to have relationships with other people. And if you're on the outside looking in at this person who's showing these signs, it's really hard to have a relationship with them. Think about it in terms of how you can help them, not, oh, it's just all about me, right? They're so mad at me, or they're so unhappy with me. Like, especially in a marriage, it's easy to do that, where we blame them for not being themselves. Well, let's try to be empathetic and really try to see each other.
Yeah, so true. The fifth symptom to be aware of is something called psychomotor agitation for no apparent reason. And this has to do with kind of like ways that your body is trying to cope that don't have any like real purpose. And so that could be like the constant tapping of the foot, right? Like you just can't stop that foot from going. It could be pacing, right? It could be that there's no real threat happening in the room, and yet this person is just pacing. And it could also be that all of a sudden they start talking super rapidly. But there's no need. They don't need to get through anything. They're not giving us a timed speech. But there's that element of that. The sixth symptom would be a feeling of worthlessness or excessive guilt, almost like as if they are a burden to other people. And they really don't enjoy that. So you can see why some of these other symptoms, if they're feeling that, would relate to that. They don't want to feel that. So sleeping through the day is a great way to escape feeling that. But sometimes when you talk to somebody with depression, you'll see and hear this theme come up of, I'm a burden. I'm too much. No one can deal with all this. No one can deal with me. And so that feeling is something to really consider. And if someone is talking in that way, that is one to really pay attention to and not be dismissive of that. The seventh symptom would be fatigue. Mm-hmm. And even if, let's say, you're experiencing mild depression, and let's say you've gone to work every day, mentally you're like, okay, I'm getting through these things and I'm showing up, I'm able to get the basics done, but you are wiped. Like that is a struggle for you. And you're like, I used to be able to do this like 3 months ago. I was fine. And now I'm struggling to get through just the basics, this fatigue. And sometimes we don't look at fatigue as a sign of depression. But when we don't have this energy and then it starts to stack up, for like a 2-week period, and usually it's longer than 2 weeks, that's going to start to add up, and it's going to start to affect the things that we can't accomplish as well.
Well, getting back to your title, right? Accentuating hope. When we're hopeful and we're enthusiastic about life, we have more energy, right? It's a psychosomatic, response in your body. You're going to have more energy when you're excited or when you're positive. And when you make these choices in your thoughts and you have positive thoughts, your body's going to respond to that. So as you're going through these things, I think it's also important to remember that as we talk about the self-coaching model and we talk about thought coaching and we talk about choosing thoughts, for those of you that are going through these symptoms, these are things that you can turn around by really exercising that agency in your thinking. It doesn't mean that these things are all going to go away. Right? But we're talking to really two audiences here. We're talking to people who are observing someone else and also people who are going through these things. And so as I listen to all of these, every one of these I deal with probably on a daily basis to some degree. And I've had to do a lot of work to get to a place where I can overcome these things on my own, but I can only do so much on my own. I have to depend on God to really help me to know my true worth. I have to depend on you to help understand what I'm going through and to be able to not feel shame about certain things, right? There's all of these things going on. So this is not something that we're saying you need to do this on your own or this other person needs to do it on their own. We're here to help each other and we're here to ask for help as well.
Yeah. You brought up this idea of shame, and I think that even though there's so much more, or depression that the world is experiencing right now, there is a huge blessing of living in this time. And that is that we are really starting to lift this shameful notion that, you shouldn't get help.
Yeah.
If you're struggling, we are actually living at a time where it's being promoted and, saying, hey, this is worth your time. It's worth it to take those moments to focus on your mental health and get that help. And so that's the boat that we're in. We want to also promote that this is the perfect time to say, you know what, I'm struggling.
Yeah.
And I can get help. I don't need to be ashamed. I know that I've had clients that come from the older generation. They call themselves the silent generation, where they were taught, you don't talk about your problems. You just deal with them in silence. And it always amazes me when we get clients from this generation, because they have been struggling and suffering for years in silence, wanting to get help and not. And now they are finally doing it.
And I think there's a big difference between the silent generation, which was suffering in silence, and they should have asked for help, but they didn't. But they also didn't have social media and the constant bombardment of, the 24-hour or 12-hour news cycle that we have now, and the constant bombardment of negativity through the media. Right? That's a different thing. And so we don't have the ability to just grin and bear it the way that we used to. Mm-hmm. It's a different world. And so you're constantly being attacked by, these frequencies that are coming to you either through media or just the frequencies in the air and the energy and the different moods of the world that we are constantly feeling around us. And I don't even think we understand what that actually means. But because of technology, because of the way that we're really locked into this matrix or this grid of modern times, I do think that there's a lot more that we're battling. And so that's why we do see mental illness on the rise. And there's no question about it. There's been a direct correlation between social media and depression and suicide with certain age groups, especially of women. And men are on the rise too, but women especially young women. And so this has been proven. And every single one of us is battling this war that we don't even understand, right? We don't understand the propaganda that we're faced all the time. We don't understand the subliminal messages that are coming at us all the time. We don't understand how something that we might laugh at or be entertained by really is getting underneath our skin, and we don't understand why we're agitated by it. There's so much evil in these messages, and I really do believe that there is another layer of this holistic battle that we're facing that we never have had to face in the past. So, having said that, yeah, the silent generation should have asked for help, but they were never taught that. And you know what? They didn't have as acute of a problem as we do today. And even if you're older and you most of your life have not felt like you can ask for help, you're facing things, and you can admit this. And I think everybody knows this. We're facing things now that we didn't face when we were younger.
Yep.
Right? We're in our late 40s, and the world is so different than when we were younger. Like even in the last 20 years since we've been married, the world has changed so much, and our habits have changed, and the way that we navigate our days and the way that we communicate with our children and our friends and everything, it's changed so much. Our families have changed. Everyone is constantly changing. Well, we're supposed to just do this on our own and just figure it out?
No.
That's stupid. It's just
We're not.
stupid. To not, first of all, to not be aware of it, and to not have some empathy for each other, because we're all in the same boat. I don't care how solid you feel in your life, you're a lot closer to losing your mind than you think you are. I fully believe this for everybody. And for people who have a really solid spiritual foundation and who know who they are and have made good choices in their lives and all that, okay, you have probably a better chance of feeling good about your life. But that doesn't mean that something can go wrong, because someone you love might not be as solid as you, and that's going to affect you, and you're going to affect them. So we're all connected. And so I really do think that we're in a very fragile state, but we don't have to be as fragile as we are, because we can help each other better than we have been.
Yeah, so true. So there's only 2 more symptoms that we're going to discuss. And so the 8th one is a diminished ability to think or concentrate. And this would also show up as indecisiveness. And so a lot of times when you hear people talk about some of these things that they're experiencing, they don't quite know how to express it. They will often use the word stuck. Like, I just feel stuck. Like they aren't able to move forward, even though they're like, I should be able to do these things that I'm thinking about. And yet for some reason, I can't seem to take these steps. And so whenever I hear the word stuck, like I just feel stuck, that's usually like one of those flashing neon signs to me, like, oh, okay, there's some stuff going on here. And it really can affect this ability to think clearly and to make decisions that would move you forward in the direction that you're thinking about. So some of our thinking abilities, like they just get misfired. They don't line up correctly. And this is usually when someone is going through depression and they don't totally recognize it.
Yeah.
They don't know enough of these symptoms and signs, but they're like, something is happening and it doesn't make all the sense to me. And that's exactly right. It's not going to make very much sense to them. And finally, this is probably one of the more severe ones, but again, it's super important to know about it. And that is if they are having recurrent thoughts of death, suicidal ideation, with a plan of how they might actually follow through with suicide, or even if they do not have a plan. And this is so important because we're going to talk about this in a minute too, but if someone actually has a plan of, they've thought about suicide as an option for them and they have a plan, they're at the tail end of going through with that plan. When someone has crossed that line of making that plan, everyone's alarm system should just be firing off. So, and we're going to talk about that, but it's important to know that that could be one of the signs of maybe not mild depression, but maybe of major depression if they've started thinking about that.
Yeah, because I think about every one of those, all 8, before you got to that last one, I deal with those things regularly. But that doesn't mean that I'm depressed, but those are things that I'm accentuating hope by dealing with those the way that I'm learning how. And that's what coaching is so helpful for. And I know that we have focused a lot on relationships and marriage and intimacy, but these things really come up in relationships and marriage and intimacy probably more. It's more obvious in these relationships than any other, right? Maybe children, but that's part of marriage and family and intimacy and all that. I have never had a plan to kill myself. I've never had a plan, but I've thought about death. I've thought about, oh, well, the world wouldn't miss me if I was gone.
Yeah.
I've had those thoughts lots of times. And I don't think that's abnormal to have those thoughts every once in a while. But when we have those thoughts a lot and we are at a place where we're not enjoying life or feel like there's value in living, that's a pretty hard place to be.
Yeah, for sure.
And again, if this isn't you and you're having doubts maybe about your marriage and you're having struggles in your marriage, maybe if this isn't about you and it's about your spouse dealing with things that don't really have anything to do with you, but you have the power to help them by learning the way to think about things, learning the self-coaching model. And if things get really bad, to go get actual professional help. But the accentuating hope part of this is real for everybody, because I think about a lot of people who are like, "Oh, I'm good. I don't need, your intimacy course, or I don't need help. I like listening to your podcast and that's fine because I get a lot out of them, but I don't need any more help than that." That may be true, but there's no reason to just say I'm good. None of us are good. We all need a little bit of help. So I guess my point in that is to say, look into learning more about how to control your thoughts and how to release the empowerment that you already have within yourself for yourself, and also to be better for that person, especially your spouse or your children or a friend. And a lot of that has to do with knowing how to think about things in a way that is helpful. And that is not something that just comes naturally. It's not. For me, I've had to learn how to do that. And even though I have all 8 of those on a regular basis, and sometimes number 9, thought coaching and being able to rely on the atonement and my spiritual beliefs, that's huge. But that alone doesn't mean I know how to unlock that without knowing how to unlock the thinking and how that affects my feelings.
Yeah.
Right? There's so much more to it than just saying, "Oh, God's got my back." Well, that's true, but we have to learn how to unlock that. And sometimes that's not obvious. And the thing I love about thought coaching and really learning how to choose thoughts and choose our feelings is that now I can apply those things that I believe about the Savior and about my spiritual beliefs. I can take those things and apply them into my life. I don't know if you know who Sadhguru is, but he's somebody who, talks about this stuff all the time, right? He's not Christian, but he talks about applying your spiritual beliefs through the power of thought and through the power of making choices. And I think that what we talk about every day is how you do that.
Yeah, it's so true. It's interesting, as we were preparing for this podcast and I was looking over all these symptoms, I'm like, wow, so many of these are involved and connected with how we think about things, right? It's like if we think we're a burden to people, that's the thought that we have.
Yeah.
That's very much like, even though it feels so real, it's because we're thinking that and we're believing it. And so I love the idea that as we make a choice to say, you know what, like I'm doing decent right now, or I'm doing pretty okay, but being able to say, but I want to do better. I would love to take a proactive and preventative approach to my mental health so that things don't just spiral out of control in the future. I want to know what the symptoms are, and I want to know how to keep my thoughts in check and in a good place so that hopefully I don't have to experience major depression.
Yeah, be proactive. Avoid it. It's like everything else. You know, we talked about this in our last podcast. Actually, we talked about our dreams and making our dreams become reality, and thinking in the present. And by really being in the present, you can make your dreams come true because you're constantly talking about the action items to make your dreams come true. The same thing with disasters. Actively preparing for those disasters, hoping that they don't happen. But if you're prepared, you won't fear, right? That's a proverb that is so true. And when we do prepare, we are going to be so much more at peace, because if that happens, then we'll know what to do. Same thing with accentuating hope in our lives, right? Just saying I'm good is not good enough. Doing everything you can to increase hope, increase faith, increase joy in your life, that takes action and it takes work, but also to avoid the future depression or sadness. If it's avoidable, then why not do everything you can to avoid it?
Yeah.
This is one of the things that we don't do in our society. It's all like, oh, how am I going to make myself feel better? Okay, well, by focusing on things that don't really make yourself feel better, it's really addiction to whether it's technology or drugs or sex or whatever, all the unhealthy things. That's what we do as a society. And even those of us that think we're healthy, we still do a lot of that.
Yeah.
So why not take a step back and say, okay, well, what are some things I can do that are really healthy to nourish myself? And one of those things is to learn information and educate ourselves so that we have the tools necessary so that we know how to deal with those things when they do come up, and they will come up.
Yes.
I promise you, if it hasn't come up, depression will come up. And if you don't feel just incredibly hopeful and grateful every single day, why not get to a place where you feel incredibly grateful and hopeful every day? It's kind of the same thing, right? It really is. You're killing two birds with one stone, right? You're accentuating hope and you're preparing for depression or disaster when it happens. If you're doing both of those things at all times, then you're going to find joy and you're going to have peace in your life. Now, my personal belief is that peace comes from above, right? Divine love and purpose in my life is where I find peace. But that's not something that just automatically happens.
Yeah.
It's not magic. And a lot of times we think that, oh, well, I'm religious and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I follow the commandments. So magically, my life's just going to be great. That's a lie.
That's not how it works.
It's a lie, right? The access to those things is there. But you have to do the work. You have to make those choices so that you can access that power that is there and that is infinite and that is all healing and all knowing. But we're here to learn how to access it.
Yes.
And it takes work.
It does take work. Okay, so something I also just wanted to make sure that we brought up, because it's so important to just know that this is an option, is that if you do find yourself with these symptoms and multiple symptoms, and they are lasting longer than 2 weeks, and they're starting to really affect you negatively, go talk to your doctor. Go talk to a psychiatrist. And please do not be afraid of getting on some medication for it, because this is what can happen. We see a lot of people resistant to medication. Oh, I don't want to do that. Sometimes we just need medication to get us through some of this cognitive stuff, the cognitive part of depression, where our brain is not making those connections like it used to. And when we take the medication, it allows our brain to get back to that place where we are thinking clearly, we are able to make those connections again, and we can look at taking medication as maybe this is just temporary.
And I would say that don't feel ashamed of taking medication. But if you go to your doctor and talk to your doctor about these things, they're probably going to say, okay, are you exercising? How are you eating? And we have 2 children that are pretty heavily medicated. But before we got to medication, we looked at their diet. We looked at how we were living our lives. We looked at how all of us were interacting. We went through all of the natural things first, and then medication became like one of the most merciful things in the world. So I was one of those people. I think Shelley was too.
Yeah.
We didn't really believe in it. We're like, oh, we don't want to go to medication, and we avoided it. And we did everything that we could beforehand, but then we said, okay, there's nothing else that we can do. And the food and the diet still are part of it.
Yes.
And they're still a very big part of it. But
Yep.
then medication was like, okay, we just need this little medication to help them. And that was a wonderful thing. So the shame in medication, I think, should be different. But that's not the first thing we go to. But if you do have that conversation with your doctor, right, they might be like, hey, you should just take this medication. And if they don't ask you about your diet or exercise, then use your brain, right, and think about that and say, hey, just so you know, I haven't been exercising. Well, try that. Try eating differently, right? Try those things. Try going through the thought processes and, the stuff that we're talking about. Try therapy. Try all of the things that you can before you get there. But when you do get to that place where you realize you need something extra, there's nothing wrong with going down that path.
Yeah, that's so true. Within the last 5 years, I've known 2 people very close to me that you would never suspect. I never suspected they would fall into major depression and even, suicidal ideation. But they did. And I was so grateful. I knew some, the signs, and I was able to recognize that. But what I also found very interesting was that they're 2 different genders, these 2 people, and they're very opposite in age and family situation and circumstances. And they both did go on medication for the time being while they worked with a therapist, while they talked through all the stuff that was weighing them down. And one was able to get off their medication within a year, with their doctor, and the other one 1.5 years. And they're doing great now because during that time, they were able to develop these skills that we're talking about and actually implement them into their lives on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And so I just want to advocate that is such a wonderful option. And we don't need to really run away from medication and say, oh, I'm going to be on it forever. Sometimes people are, and a lot of times people aren't. And so if for the time it's going to be something that is helpful and beneficial, it's something to really, really consider. Okay, we have one final thing that we wanted to talk about, and this has to do with symptom number 9, which is the suicidal ideation. And this is such a heavy topic, and it is on the rise in today's world, and it's happening to people of all ages. And the most startling, though, is it's just happening younger and younger.
Yeah.
In children as well. And I just read an article, I think 2 weeks ago, of a 10-year-old, that committed suicide with his sweatshirt in his own bedroom. And so it's important to know that there are clear signs when someone is heading down that path. And while we're not going to get into all those signs in this episode, I wanted to give you a resource. It's an awesome resource. And as life coaches, we go through this ourselves, but it's open to anybody. It's simple, it's clear, it's not complicated. It's an online course that only takes about an hour to do. And it's called QPR. So it's kind of like CPR, but it's QPR. And you can find it at qprinstitute.com. And basically, their approach is, hey, I want you to learn some of the signs so that you recognize them and know what to do when you see someone going through these signs. And the goal is to really encourage people, hey, don't be afraid to help because you don't know how to solve someone who's struggling with that. They give you the confidence to say, no, you're not in charge of solving what they're going through, but this is what you can do, and it's super beneficial. So we're going to just leave you with the 3 things that they say to do. The first one is the letter Q, which means to question. Ask them questions. If they're saying something like, oh, I'm such a burden to my family, it would be better that I wasn't here. Ask them questions about that. We assume that if we ask them a question, we're the one putting the idea of suicide in their mind. That's not the case. They have already thought about it if they are saying stuff like this. So don't be afraid to actually ask them questions. They will appreciate your interest in them.
Yeah.
Even talking about something as hard and difficult as that. The second is the letter P, which means to persuade. And this is not to persuade them not to do things or to do specific things or give them a list of 500 other things. What the persuasion is it has a lot to do with this hope. Like, things can get better, and here is how. You have to go talk to this person, right? It's to persuade them to get extra help and not to try to manage everything on their own. Now, that anyone can do that. That's a loving thing to do if you care about somebody, is to say, come on, I got you. Let me hold your hand through this. Let me show you what we're going to do. And then that leads to the last one. It's the letter R, and it means refer. It means you sit down at a computer with them and say, let's find somebody who specializes in this for your situation. I'll help you. And you sit down, and it's okay if you don't know anybody. It's okay if you don't know any therapists who deal with that. You sit down with them and you say, look at these options. There are so many people who are available to help you. Which one looks good to you?
Yeah.
And I encourage everybody to take this course. It only takes about an hour. And if you're not experiencing suicidal ideation, take this for someone else that you love, even if you don't suspect it, because it may not be you. It may not be your spouse. It may be an in-law. It may be your grandchildren. It may be a niece or a nephew or your best friend. You never know who is in this situation and is in need of help. So again, that is qprinstitute.com, and anyone can take that course. Any thoughts on that as we wrap up?
Well, I think a lot of the people that listen to our podcast understand what I mean by this, but I think sometimes we live in this culture of wanting to feel like we're perfect. And when we're not, we have shame and we have guilt. I, for one, and I know you feel the same way, I believe in a merciful, loving Savior. And I believe that we are all sinners and we all make mistakes and we're all weak. We all need each other to be there for each other. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be trying to do better. We should be. That's where a lot of joy comes from, is when we conquer our demons and we improve and we get better in our weaknesses. And that's the purpose of this life, right? So a lot of people will go down this path of depression because they feel worthless, because they can't kick a habit, or they feel worthless because they're not as perfect as somebody else and they're comparing themselves to other people. Your spouse or you or your son or daughter or a friend of yours that you know feels this way. We all do from time to time. And so we strongly encourage you to be empathetic and be loving and to be charitable with faith in whatever power that is that will help you or them overcome these things. And even if we don't overcome them right away, if we have love and we know that we're of value and we are loved from above, but also loved from those people that are around us all the time, we will conquer these things. And even if we don't conquer them in this life, we have the ability to conquer them into the next life. So I guess the thing I want to leave you with is we should constantly in our marriages, starting there, well, I guess the name of this podcast is Restore Yourself, Restore Your Marriage, right? Start with yourself. Find hope. Do whatever you need to do to change your thoughts and to focus on the things that you're grateful for and to focus on the things that bring you hope. Faith, hope, and charity, those are so much more meaningful than I can get into. But whatever that means to you, make that real. But that takes work, and it's okay that it takes work and that you're not automatically whole. None of us are. And for those people that you love, they're going through the same thing. And when we're empathetic and we're sympathetic to at least understand that we're all in the same boat together, we're all trying, and we're all mostly doing our best. When we have that compassion for each other, especially in a marriage, you're going to become closer. Get rid of blame. Change your thoughts, change your feelings, change the way that you look at your spouse and see them for who they really are. To do that takes work, and it takes some time, and it's going to take some struggle to get there, especially when things are hard. But I know that if you do that and if you work together, you're going to find so much hope and so much peace and so much strength together. And when you're together as a couple in that place, you can help anybody. You can help your children. You can help your friends. You can help your neighbors. There's nothing more powerful than a married couple who is loving to each other and who is compassionate to one another and who sees each other as a weak person who is becoming strong. So that's all I want to say.
Okay. Well, we're going to leave you with one more resource, and that is the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. And that number is 1-800-273-8255. So I'm just going to repeat it one more time in case you were writing it down or taking notes. It's 1-800-273-8255. Thank you so much for listening, everyone, today. We know that this is sometimes a heavier topic, but also one that is needed in today's world. And we hope that as you are listening and thinking about what we've discussed, that you will be able to recognize these symptoms either within yourself or your spouse or others. Because remember, the more you restore this type of intimacy with yourself, the more you can restore it with your spouse. So thanks for listening, and we hope you will join us again next week.